They built the forest, and there's the scene where Elphaba goes out into the forest and, she has an encounter after they save the lion cub and with Fiyero. And then she sings, "I'm Not That Girl." And apparently there were birds, real birds, that built some nests in that forest and learned to sing that song back to her.
No way. What? Wow. Welcome to Does It Fly, the podcast that puts your favorite sci-fi properties, inventions, and conceits to the test. I'm your mad scientist, Hakeem Oluseyi.
And I'm your pop culture expert, Tamara Krinsky. Time to dive into today's topic and see, does it fly? Meow.
Today's lesson is oppression.
Meow.
I'm going to have to take your voice away, little kitty.
That's no fair.
Listen, oppression by its nature is not fair. And if oppressors like to do anything, it's take away your voice.
That is so, so true. Well, luckily on this podcast, we do not stand for that. Welcome to Does It Fly, everybody. I'm Tamara Krinsky, and here I am with Dr. Hakeem Oluseyi. Dr. O, how are you today?
I am wonderful. I am doing wonderful. And, if I lived in a world where animals could teach, debate, and protest, they outnumber us. So what world would that be? I don't know.
Well, if you want to get an idea of what that world might be, then you've made it to the right place, because today we are going to be talking about the movie Wicked, which came out in 2024, specifically about the topic of animals talking. And if you're new to Does It Fly, this is the podcast where we talk about the science and story behind some of your favorite conceits, gadgets, gizmos in sci-fi, fantasy, horror, the like. And so first, Dr. O will talk about the science behind could animals talk? I will talk about the story and how that's used throughout the story, and then we'll do a Does It Fly for the vibes.
Yes. And today we are talking about a specific part of the movie Wicked, and it is those animals that are speaking.
This is much bigger than just some words on a chalkboard.
We can still converse in private, thank us.
A dear friend of mine.
A deer?
A cow, actually.
And find that their voices are being silenced, both politically and literally. And so that raises the big question. Could animals ever talk like us humans?
I'm not trying to silence you here, not being oppressive, just want to be kind to our listeners and our watchers, that if you have not seen Wicked yet, and we are talking about the movie musical Wicked, which was directed by John Chu, released in 2024. The second half of it is coming out in November. Depending on when you're watching it, it may have already come out. It may be about to come out. So if you have not seen the movie yet, and the 2024 movie, and you don't want any spoilers, click pause on us, go watch the movie, and come right back and pick up right where Dr. O left off.
Yes, where I'm I'm giving you all this inside info. Because when you look at Wicked, you think green lady, right? You think witch. You think houses, wicked witches of the east and west, north, south, and south by southeast and south by southwest. But this it's a departure. It's about the animals. And, I find that a really interesting take to have a form of oppression that includes silencing the political voices of animals. But let's get into it. It turns out when you talk about animals speaking, it almost sounds like a nonsensical question, because people know that animals communicate. So the question is, what's the difference between communication and language and speaking? And, where do we draw that line? If animals are communicating via something very similar to language, could we even tell, right? Is it that they're doing it or not? Or, are we asking the wrong question because they may be doing it and we don't recognize it as such? Am I doing well? All right so far? my partner.
You are doing fantastic. And I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. The question of communication versus speech. And, again, just to like really quickly orient folks who it may have been a minute since you saw Wicked. There's a specific plot line in Wicked where Dr. Dillamond, who is one of the instructors at Shiz University, where our main characters, Elphaba and Glinda, or Galinda, depending on at what point you're watching.
It's Galinda with a G.
Go to school. He is a goat. He is a professor. And throughout the course of the film, he begins to be persecuted for speaking in what humans recognize as a way to use your term, Hakeem, a way that humans use to communicate with language that we understand. In this case, I watched the film in English, so it's in English. And there is a plot line about animals' speech gradually being taken away and them being put in a situation to where they would never learn to communicate with humans as a way of keeping them under control. So, I think communication versus speech is a great way to frame it.
Excellent, excellent. So, if you get down to it at the basics, essentially all animals communicate, right? Bacteria swap chemical signals. Monkeys and those little animals that live in holes and stand up, prairie dogs or whatever, they give these alarm cries. And whales get really advanced. And, recent studies have pointed out that some species, like I think it was sperm whales, they've determined that they have names, right? They have specific calls that are related to specific individuals in their pod. But speech is special. Speech is special. And the thing about speech is that it's anatomically driven. And the anatomy is both in the anatomy that forms the sounds in your throat, but also the circuitry in your brain that controls those areas in your throat that deliver speech. So, you have what are called Brokaw's and Wernicke's area in the brain. You have syntax circuits, but then there's culture, right? Like you just said, you speak English, you speak English. There's shared sounds that have specific meanings. It's like a name. What is a name? What's in a name? It's a sound that I associate with you, Tamara. In and of itself, it doesn't mean anything, but in the context of our human interaction, I know that represents my amazing partner. I just happen to have had a conversation in recent weeks with one of the world's top researchers on this topic. His name is Eric Jarvis.
I'm only laughing. If you're watching, you're seeing a smile on my face. I'm only laughing because I literally thought you were going to a very different place. I thought you were going to say, I just happened to have had a conversation with my amazing dog.
I do that every day. I have a conversation with my dog. It's mostly like, stop it. But but Eric Jarvis actually studies the physiology that humans and other animals share. And he finds that, what allows us to create speech is present in a lot of other animals, but not every animal utilizes it in the same way, right? It requires a sort of reassignment of certain parts of the brain. And let me get into it, right? So there are parts of your brain that control your muscles for your motor functions, movement, all right? So the whole idea here is how do you get the brain to take those areas and repurpose them, these fine motor skills that we have with our fingers, get those same fine motor skills in our throats? Because there's a lot of coordination that occurs to generate human speech. And so let me get into it. So he says that there are specialized neural pathways, I'm reading y'all, connecting forebrain motor circuits to the muscles that generate vocalizations. Your larynx in humans, the syrinx in birds, right? We all know what parrots can do. And so, cuckoo, cuckoo. So what happens is there are certain species that he describes as being vocal learners. They hear a sound, a new sound, and they can mimic it, which is different from what most animals do when they have these calls, these calls that are innate, like the ones that cry alarms. That's not the same thing as I hear a new sound and now I mimic it, that a parrot can do, that some corvids can do, right? That's a completely different thing. Jarvis proposes a motor origin hypothesis The vocal pathways evolved by duplication or expansion of existing motor circuitry for controlling movements, which then specialized to control muscles for vocalization. And this involved changes in certain genes, changes in your synaptic wiring, and gene regulation in brain regions that link the motor forebrain to the lower motor neurons controlling voice muscles. So it's basically connections between your more primitive parts of your brain and your more advanced parts of your brain.
They're apparently on set. So one of the things that Wicked did was John Chu was very specific about wanting to have a lot of practical sets. So he really wanted Oz to feel like a real place. He didn't want it all to be blue screen. I mean, they certainly use blue screen and a lot of visual effects to complement what they did. But, they built the forest, and there's the scene where Elphaba goes out into the forest and, she has an encounter after they save the lion cub and with Fiyero. And then she sings, "I'm Not That Girl." And apparently there were birds, real birds, that built some nests in that forest and learned to sing that song back to her.
No way. What? Wow.
So that feels like, that's like just listening to you talk about that sort of that coordination, that mimicking, that development. It sounds like that fits into the category of what you're talking about.
Exactly, because it's a feedback loop. Because what's happening, right? If you're going to mimic a sound, you have to vocalize it yourself, hear yourself, and then adjust to match, right? And something else you brought up that Jarvis said, he believes that humans sang before they spoke, that singing preceded speech.
Really? Does he give a reason for why?
Well, yeah. So let me get to that. So I have a note on that one as well. Connections to movement and dance. Because this is something I asked him about. So I, as a teenager, rap was new. And the thing that made hip hop different from the music that preceded it is that it had no melody, right? It was bass and drum was the melody. And, by bringing that to the forefront, my Gen X-ness, as a teenager, I would beat out beats on the table. Boom, 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 stuff like that. Well, my niece was born in 1984 and she couldn't even walk yet. And when I was beating out these beats, she'd bop along, right? She would jam to the beat. And I'm like, that is not learned. This kid that's innate in that child. So what she says is Jarvis speculates that circuits supporting vocal learning are evolutionarily related to circuits controlling rhythmic motor movements, dancing. Because those circuits, motor timing, synchronization, may have been co-opted or contaminated by the vocal pathways. So we sing and dance before we speak, but it's because you make those connections and those circuits that you're using are already there for doing motor things that have to happen in a coordinated and rhythmic way. It led to singing and then to speech.
Well, that also makes me think about the deaf community and the fact that, the deaf community experiences music. I don't want to speak on behalf of them, but just in, interactions.
Well, you can feel the bass in a song for sure without.
Yeah. So, so there is music that's experienced. There is dance that's experienced. And so just thinking about that, like, again, going back to your original differentiation between what is speech, what is language, what is communication, and the way that music and rhythm fits into that versus what I'll call spoken language. And again, and then on top of that, a spoken language that is given from one person and received by another and understood, and how we define that and what are, I'll call it the layers or the prejudices that we may have looking at that and then deconstructing that.
Yeah. So even with all that said now, could our GOAT professor actually speak if, under the right circumstances? So if you've ever been around goats or read about goats, you know they bleat. It's called. Let me eat this aluminum can. Bah. Scientists can actually map out their anatomy and come to draw some predictions about what sounds they're capable of and incapable of. So a goat would have difficulty with the TH sound or the S sound. Birds don't have that limitation. The control they have over their syrinx allows them to make, a bird could mimic me and not only mimic the words, but say it and sound like my actual voice, right? They're incredible vocal mimickers.
Petra, what's a dog say?
And even humans, right? We struggle with certain groups of consonants. Your brain wiring, once it gets in effect, you have difficulties. So I used to work a lot in South Africa. All right. And in South Africa, a lot of people are aware that their languages have clicks. And when you hear these clicks, when someone is speaking on a radio, television, you're listening to a conversation, it's seamless. They just, as they're speaking, the clicks are just happening. Right? There's no extra effort put into making them. So I decided, hey, let me learn how to do this. And I had a colleague tell me about, there's not just one click, Hakeem. There's these different clicks. And here's how they all sound and manifest, right? It's difficult for me at my age, from the language history that I have, to be able to do that. Now, take another species.
Right. I was going to say, so bringing it back to the animals, it sounds like some of them have the anatomy to do it. Some of them don't. But even if they did have the anatomy, like learning language, ideally, or learning language is potentially universal in that if you learn something early, you build those mental pathways.
Right.
But if you don't, it becomes harder to learn as you grow older.
Exactly. So in other words, it's hard for us humans, right. Even though we're built for it under certain circumstances.
Yeah.
So could they lose their speech? So what is the human parallel? So we're aware of degenerative diseases like ALS can silence muscles. People have a stroke, they can lose their grammar or speech, or certain traumas can cause you to lose your ability to vocalize. And then, I don't know if it's real. I've seen somewhere where it is, where a person suffers a head trauma and comes out of it speaking another language.
Yeah, that's
Have
real.
you heard
I've
of
about that? Yep.
Yeah. I saw somewhere it's real, but I'm not accepting that it's real until I verify that it's real. Mm-hmm. But that would be a completely different game changer. So the silencing in Wicked, the silencing of the animals, maps to real phenomena that happens with humans physiologically, mentally, not just something that messes up the anatomy that produces the speech, but it's in the brain. So could you have such an effect without the trauma? I don't know how you would do that. Right. You could do it, of course, right? There's this phenomenon called Havana syndrome, where these diplomats were getting headaches or something like that, and they thought they were hitting them with like microwave energy. So you can impact the brain in that way. But let me get down to the end of it. Could animals really talk? Biology says not without massive rewiring of the brain. So what humans have is these three things in combination: the neurology, the anatomy, and our cultural learning. Could animals lose speech? Well, neurology says yes. Deprivation or injury can erase language, even when thought remains, right? But can a goat teach history? That is the question. And I would say that, no. And Wicked, is not just about, the story is more than just about animals generating speech. It gets to the point that speech is power in a species that utilizes it. And if you can silence animals or you can silence people, you can steal their power. And taking away a voice is a fast way of taking away a life. So I'm going to say that it opens up a wonderful area of conversation that is also an area of very active research. And we do have a lot in common with the animals, especially those who are vocal learners. So if you reduce your animals to a special subset, then, you come closer to it flying. But in this case, we have a goat, and the goat doesn't seem to be capable neurologically or anatomically of delivering human speech. So I reluctantly say that in this case, our dear Professor Goatley, what's his name, Dillamond?
Yeah. Dr. Dillamond.
Dr. Dillamond does not fly.
Nothing truly
I get it, though. I mean, the way you've laid it out, it does make sense. I do have to say, could a goat teach history? I do have to give a shout out to my goat, because my history teacher, Mr. Nucio, was my favorite of all time. He was awesome. He was my Western Civ teacher in high school, and he was incredible. So can a goat teach history? Yes, if it's Mr. Nucio. But bringing it back to animals and sort of now flipping it to, does it fly for the story to have talking animals? And you touched on this a little bit, what I think is so interesting about the way that John Chu and the writers, I feel like, because I love the original musical Wicked, and they've expanded the storyline here. And I'm guessing we're going to see even more of that in the upcoming sequel. Yeah. But they really use it to fuel Elphaba's development as a rebel. The whole thing about Wicked is it twists the idea of what is a villain and her origin story, and how we see somebody who's always been perceived as the bad guy, what causes them to rebel against something, to speak out. And one of the things that we see in this is that from the very beginning, when Elphaba was born and she pops out green and her dad immediately rejects her, is she was raised by her nanny, Dulcibert, who is a talking bear. Yeah. So from the very beginning, one of the first creatures that accepted her was an animal who spoke. That's where she found love. That's where she found acceptance. So then if you think about this whole childhood that she had, where, she had a sister who was clearly the favored one, who her dad lavished all of his love on, and, completely rejected Elphaba. I mean, it's also interesting. I'll just say this too, the fact that her sister is in a wheelchair, the fact that, you have somebody who's green, you're dealing with, lots of metaphor here with disability and difference and feeling othered. And so, there's a lot more to dive into there, which we're not going to do on
a
this
question for you.
show.
A question for you. It's understood that when movie makers are making movies that involve space and technologies, that they have these technical consultants of engineers and scientists. But movies also talk a lot about, the human condition and psychology. And that's really sensitive stuff, right? So do they also lean on counselors and therapists?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to speak specifically for Wicked, because I don't know who their set of advisors were, or if they had. I mean, John Chu's an incredibly smart filmmaker, so I'm guessing whether he had an official advisor or not, he did a ton of research. I know that, there are many, many movies. So just a couple of examples. The Science and Entertainment Exchange, which is a program of the National Academy of Sciences, they will actually provide you with a free science advisor for your film. And that can range from, if you're doing something like a CSI and your set designer just wants to talk with somebody about what does a forensics lab look like? And let's make sure we're not doing anything egregious here that, a professional forensics expert would look at and be like, that does not belong in a lab. Right. All the way to, a bunch of the Marvel movies have had science advisors in the development phases, where they've talked with physicists or with, astronauts or whomever.
But that brings up the bias, right? When you hear science advisor, you think of the natural sciences and engineering. We don't often think of the social sciences.
Well, so the Norman Lear Center actually has an organization that provides all kinds of consults for and if our producers can help me out with this, because I'm blanking on the name right now, but if you Google Norman Lear Center, you will find the name of the organization that has a bunch of experts that you can consult with. If you go to the Writers Guild website, the Union for Screenwriters and TV writers, and lots of creators as well, if you go there, they actually have a whole resources page for experts that you can connect with too. And you don't have to be a WGA member to access that page. So yeah, there are a number of organizations that exist to make sure that there are accurate portrayals of all kinds of the human condition in addition to the scientific condition.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome, sir. Hollywood Health and Society. Thank you. Producers come in for the save. Yes, Hollywood Health and Society. They have an amazing set of resources for writers who are delving into these areas. So Elphaba, from the beginning, has had a propensity for a good reason, to having a love for talking animals, for seeing them as equals, for seeing them as, a safe space for her. And she and Dr. Dillamond, when she first arrives in his class, they form a bond. Elphaba, makes some comments, stands up for him, helps him later on, and they become friends. And there's another piece there of her whole life. She has been othered. She has been made to feel strange. She has been made to feel like she does not fit in, that she does not measure up. And so that metaphor continues. And then as the plot continues and Dr. Dillamond reveals that the animals are being silenced all over Oz, and that the animals are being used as, and this is intentional language, they are being used as scapegoats.
Literally.
For troubles that society is having. There'd been a drought, and those that were in charge decided, well, hey, we need to blame the animals here. So it becomes a theme, and that really informs her development of her sense of self over the course of this movie, and how she and Glinda, ultimately choose different paths to how to make change. From the very beginning, we hear that if you go and you meet the wizard, he will grant you your heart's desire. And her desire at the start is to no longer be green. And yes, I am wearing a green jacket on purpose. And so to no longer be green, she wants to be degreenified.
Well, what Kermit said.
It ain't easy being green. It ain't easy being green. But by the time we get to the latter half of the movie, she has changed what her heart's desire is. She no longer cares or worries about the green. What she wants is for the persecution against the animals to be stopped. And she really believes that if she can get to the wizard, if she can ask him this, he will grant her her heart's desire. And the persecution of the animals will stop the discrimination. And then she makes the discovery, oh, no, they're actually the ones who set it up.
It's you. You're behind all of this. You're the reason why people are turning against the animals. It's all because of you.
Oh, geez.
Right. And
you
that
just gave away the whole movie.
I said there were going to be spoilers. That is ultimately what fuels her to make some choices about whether or not she's going to join the wizard or defy gravity and perhaps go out on her own. Now, none of this would work in the movie, because we have to suspend, based on the fact that you said, animals talking does not fly, or at least a goat teaching history currently does not fly.
Right.
We need some pretty amazing movie making to make this believable for us as the audience, to take that magical what if that movies can do for us, right? So,
but is the speech necessary? Could you have that same closeness? And I just leave it there. Is speech really critical to the story?
I think for this story it is, and I think that's a reason that, it actually starts in the source material. I haven't actually read the original Wizard of Oz book by Frank Albaum. There's talking animals in there. And then in Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West, which is the 1995 book by Gregory Maguire that inspired Wicked the musical, you have talking animals in there. So it's always been a part of it. And I don't think that it's not, in this case, it's not just about communication. It is about language and speech and humans and animals being able to talk to each other in a way that humans understand the animals, and that being seen as a sign of equality, so that then taking that away has the dramatic impact of realizing, oh, these animals are being persecuted. So yeah, I do think it's necessary for this story. But
Just
I
like
also,
Planet of the Apes.
yeah,
And it's
exactly.
taken away yeah.
Yeah. But I don't think any of it would work. And we, as the audience, wouldn't go on that journey if there weren't incredible visuals on screen and if the animal characters weren't believable. So I got to give a big shout out and some recognition to visual effects supervisor Pablo Hellman, who supervised all of this and with his team gives us such a fantastic portrayal, not only of Dr. Dillamond, but of Cheshire, who's the head of the monkey guard for the wizard, and other animals that we get to see, Dulcibert. So I want to talk for a second about and give some props to the process that helped to make that happen, to pull aside the wizard's curtain for a moment, if you will. Ooh. So what was interesting about this process is that it didn't actually use motion capture or mocap. Pablo did a great interview in Polygon where he talked about this process. And basically, he knew that John Chu was going to want something really organic on set. So what they ended up doing was they had what they called an animal unit, where they had a group of about, and I'm looking here, of about 15 people who were stand-ins for the digital characters. But they weren't actually capturing their movement. It was really about having a reference there for the director, cinematographer, etc. Because as magical things happen when you're on set, right? And there are things about where to point the camera, how to frame something, different interactions that might happen where as amazing an imagination as an actor may have, or a director or DP may have, director of photography, as they're on set shooting things on a blue screen, if you only have a tennis ball as a reference, you kind of lose something. Whereas if you have a body there, you might be inspired in the moment about how you want a shot to look.
So was it the case that the animal unit would act that out and then they'd recreate it subsequent to that?
Yeah, exactly. So you had this really interesting partnership between the animal unit, who were these actors, very skilled movers, gave a sense of what the animals would be like in the space. But then that was paired with what the animators did, who, sort of essentially became the performers. And one of the reasons, Pablo talks about is that the idea that you would be capturing human physiology and the way a human speaks instead of the musculature that a goat was used to speak, or the imagined musculature that a goat would use to speak. And it wouldn't actually map properly.
Right.
So they use the animal unit to help figure out kind of what would go on in the space of the set. But then the animators were the ones who really created what these creatures look like. And there's a great quote in the interview that I wanted to read. There's a lot of stuff that you learn from human behavior and what makes something important, like ambiguity or thoughtfulness or good thoughts or not so good thoughts, or like, how do you live in the gray of not being white or black? There's a lot of that in the creatures we have in Wicked. I would say Wicked is about that. It's about nothing being exactly what it seems. So you need to translate that into those creatures. And I would say all the projects I've done over the years got me to this point. So I just love the fact that you have somebody who, it's not just about making something cool on screen, but it's about finding the process that allows everyone involved in the movie to have their best moment on set, and then really bringing all of that humanity to the story. So I think that's another reason that, the animals speaking in this film really works and brings us in as audience members, and then causes us to feel true loss and compassion when we see the discrimination that's happening to them throughout.
Man, you just made me really want to watch this movie. Like, wow.
Yeah. I mean, I saw it the first time around on the big screen. I don't know. I have to kind of assume that there are going to be a couple of, savvy movie chains that show the first Wicked again before, or the first part of this, the 2024 movie on the big screen as a catch up or as a special before Wicked for Good, which is part 2, is released. And so if you do have a chance to go see it on the big screen, go do it. I mean, the visuals are just amazing. The story is amazing. And also the sound, the singing, like, go see it. As you have probably figured out by now,
I was going to get to it. Yes.
I do think that talking animals in Wicked the movie absolutely flies. And I think it's a really great example of something that maybe in our gut we know doesn't exist in real life at this point, but we are so willing to go with what is the fantasy of what is created on screen. And I'm really grateful for that.
Wonderful. And you know what, Tamara, we are sitting here with adult minds. When you're a child, you're not thinking this can't exist. And, you're drawn into this world and you really think you can have conversations with your animals and pets. So it's a whole different magical world for children, I think, that's brought to life. But let me ask your opinion about movie making. So there's a human phenomenon that's sad, but it, here's what I'm getting at. When there are crises, when there are suffering, human art seems to go to another place. It becomes more magical, more deep, more impactful, more emotive in many cases. And right now, there has been a Hollywood crisis. And what the crisis is, as I'm stating it, is, after the pandemic, movie theaters aren't the same as the opportunities for getting entertainment from our phones and devices has expanded exponentially over the years. We don't lean on traditional media as much. And not only that, there's this story online about how CGI got really good, then it got less good because they were less willing to invest to get that really high quality CGI. Do you think this present moment, because the way you're describing this movie, it does feel like to me, it's going a bit deeper than is typical. And so I just wonder if that phenomenon of crisis bringing forth revolution and depth in art is now playing out in Hollywood because, it's a different competitive landscape. And so really to get things funded and sold, it has to be really compelling.
Those are many questions.
Just one.
I mean, here's what I will say. I will say that, look, I think Hollywood has had a tough time with the double whammy of the pandemic and people, not being in theaters, followed by, streaming has been going on for a while, and proliferation of screens and fracturing of attentions. Are you going to see a movie on, a streaming service? Are you going to see it in the theater? What makes a film theater worthy? These are all really good questions. When it comes to the kinds of movies that are being made in reaction to and those factor into the economic question of what kinds of movies are being made. When it comes to the kind of movies that are being made in reaction to what might be going on in the world, I would say with that, art has always been something that reacts to what's happening in the world. Sometimes it's an escape. Sometimes it's a comment on. And sometimes it's something that pushes you to dive right into what's going in the world. And every artist has a different way of doing that. And filmmakers and TV makers and content creators are no different. What I will say is interesting is when you have something that has been in the works for a while, like a movie like Wicked, and then it happens to come out at a time where things in the world may be paralleling certain things in the movie that maybe were felt a little bit along the way, but you couldn't have predicted when you first started making something. So at the end of the day, what I think is really important is to have a point of view as an artist, to put the best art on screen that you can for your budget and your resources that you have available. And then hopefully to get support in getting it out into the world and getting attention for it, no matter what size screen it goes out on.
Oh, that was poetic. And, we've come full circle. Talk about Hollywood, health, and society. Yes, ma'am. Back to the animals, the
Back
talking
to the
animals.
We're all just animal creatures at the end of the day, which brings, all right. So going back to our question of Wicked and talking animals, does it fly for the vibes? My question for you, for us today is, would it be good? Do we think it would be a good thing if animals could talk, or forget even like a good thing? Like what would it be like if they could?
You know,
and how would that affect things and change things?
Wow. So first off, there's a difference based on the animal and the animal's personality, which is species specific in broad terms. So for example, my little dog is two things. She's happy and supportive, right? So I imagine every day when I would come in, instead of like jumping on me and wagging her tail, she'd be like, Daddy, you're home. Oh my God, I love you. Right. But there's the demanding side where she's always taking her paw and trying to make me, rub her and, scratch her and that sort of thing. She would never leave me alone. She'd be so annoying because she almost doesn't leave me alone now. Right. So I feel like our conversations, I don't feel like she'd be teaching classes.
Well, that brings up an interesting thought that just hit me, which is that just because, like, what we see in Wicked is we see animals that are self-sufficient. Mm-hmm. And part of the discrimination that happens is in taking away speech, they're also taking away some of that self-sufficiency and self-determination. Like, just listening to you talk about your dog, you were talking about your dog having the ability to chat with you and talk to you, but not necessarily like being able to take care of herself. So, which makes you go, okay, so like that makes you think that like if a pet could talk but wasn't self-sufficient, like then they're really much more like a child, like an eternal child that you have. And are you okay with that?
Right. And, now that you turn it in that direction, now I feel guilty because then if they can talk to you, is it ethical for them to be your pet? Right.
Right. So that brings up a question too. Like, is that okay?
Yeah.
Like if animals could talk, would we not have pets?
It sounds like that ability to have speech gives you agency. It gives you a level of understanding of the world. It gives you like we know that mammals suffer, right? They have the ability to suffer. And typically that is a ethical line that we draw, right? We don't want, if you are instilling pain on animals, you're in trouble with the law now, right? And even with our farms, they attempt to, harvest, as they say, the animals in a humane way. But that would change the game. I mean, just think about industrial farming, a bunch of animals packed into a chicken coop, right? A giant chicken coop, right? And they're all yelling at you, when you walk in there, let me out of here.
That immediately brings to thought, like that also like translates into the way, over time, there have been stories that use speaking animals to teach lessons.
Right.
Because immediately I think of Animal Farm.
Right, of course.
But even going back, into like myth and going back into fables, if animals can talk, they can often deliver truisms that maybe impact in a different way than if we hear them from human characters.
Yeah. You know what? So what you just reminded me of is there's a phrase that, some people see and some people don't see. And that is the phrase that diversity is our greatest strength. And I totally see it, right? Because, science has been globalized for a long time and people from different walks of life bring in different perspectives and see solutions that, otherwise you wouldn't see. I've seen it over and over and over that, that mix. Because not only that, because it's sort of a merit-based hierarchical thing, you don't just get the top 10% or 15% of your community. You're bringing together that top 15% of a lot of different communities, right? So now so now what you're saying is that diversity is going to even extend beyond humanity. So you would have labs with, birds and mammals and, goats as professors. So then, I've often said that if humans, when I look at our aspirations of human perfection in the future, I look to Star Trek, right? And I've often said to people, listen, if we were as a species all trusting and trustworthy, we could be Star Trek tomorrow. Because when we come together and we cooperate, there's virtually nothing that we can't do as a species. Now, what if you brought even other species in to that fold? What could we accomplish as a planet? I mean, the sky is the limit, because we're going to have insights that we would never have otherwise, right? Think about dogs that see the world through smell.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. Like,
yeah.
it brings, like, circling back to this idea of like speech is power, which you brought up before, speech as something that elevates you, but then also like speech versus self-sufficiency, which is sort of a different question. This idea of there are different kinds of intelligences in the world, right? Like dogs smell differently, different creatures see differently. You know, bats see, creatures
Sonically,
that, animals that work through echolocation. So
right.
if you, it just makes me so curious about what would the world be like if you lived in a world where you were taking advantage of all of these, and not taking advantage, but you were acknowledging and involving all of these different kinds of intelligences. Like, what does that world look like?
And even extended
how cool
beyond
would it be to
animals.
live in that world?
Yeah, like even if fungi, like I find fungi or fungi incredibly fascinating. I would love to hear what they have to say.
Oh yeah, well, you think about like the mycelial networks that live below ground, where you have different trees and fungi talking to each other and essentially informing each other what's going on. Like
partnerships between species, right? You know, there's so much, and not only that. The plants and the fungi are aware of a chemical inventory that they possess that we, only utilize a tiny fraction of, and I just think that you're really, when all of life becomes part of our brain trust, Wikipedia ain't got nothing on the Lifeopedia.
Well, I also think when you talk about, where we are right now with climate change and how we talk about it and the way that we think about the planet, it's interesting in that there's a much larger percentage of people who, quote unquote, believe that climate change is real versus the number of people who spend time talking about it, which is an interesting statistic. And so trying to close the gap between that, you wonder if there were a way for animals, for other pieces of nature to express itself in a way that was considered equal, and I'm using that word in quotes, equal to humanity, it would literally change the conversation about how we treat this planet, what we do on this planet, extractive practices. And you do have a group of people in this world who do actually think that way. You have, I think this is not scientifically tested, but based on what we see, a much larger percentage of people who don't think about that, who put humans right at the top of the chain and don't necessarily think about how our actions affect things downstream. So it just, You
just brought up something. Even when we imagine this world where animals talk, we're still imagining humans at the top of the pecking order.
Oh, right? I don't know that I am, actually. No, I don't know. I'm actually wondering like what that would feel like to be in a world where you had, I'll use the words like symbiotic relationships between different species where, so my brain just went in a funky direction. Like if humans are, if it's not a triangle where you've got something at the top of the pyramid like humans, but instead it really is a tangle or a circle where, we talked before about, does speech automatically mean self-sufficiency, or is it the ability of your dog to communicate when you come home, but you still need to feed your dog and you still need to take care of your dog? It's not like your dog talks and is suddenly starting to drive. But like, what if we could hear from other species groups, et cetera, about how they actually see where we fall short, how we as humans are not self-sufficient and where they fill in the gaps. And what if that was the world we were living in, that isn't a pyramid with humans at the top, but is a more circular, intertwined, I don't know what the right metaphor world here is. What would that look like? What would that feel like? Could we do that? Like, what would the hubris that humans have after being conditioned for so long to consider ourselves at the top? Is that something we could ever let go of?
Well, no, but there's a lot of, but then there's a lot of tops. Like the other thing is animals have to eat. We're animals, we eat, and we've made the process of getting our food, especially our animal food, it's been really sterilized in a way where you see a steak, you don't see a cow that's standing on its feet, and now we have to dispatch that cow, butcher it, and turn into a steak, right?
So do you think that if animals could actually talk with language to us, that everybody would be vegan?
Again, remember now in my world, I'm extending it to plants. I've always wondered, hey, vegan plants are living too.
Well, we would just be very hungry.
Well, because imagine, let's take us out of the picture. Imagine you have a lion chasing a gazelle, and they have the ability to talk to each other. And the gazelle's like, please, Mr. Lion, don't eat me. And the lion is like, I'm sorry, Mr. Gazelle, but what choice do I have? I got to eat something. I'm a carnivore. It opens up it creates a world where you really have to, they're going to have something like the United Nations where they come together. And the prey species are like, look, predators evolved. We need to find another way of feeding the predators so that and then the ones that graze, that the grass will have their delegation. They're like, well, as grasses, we don't appreciate the goats eating us every day.
Right.
And where does this lead? That circle of life involves life eating life.
Right.
And if all life can communicate, it's a slippery slope. So
then here's what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
So to that question of do animals talking, does plant life talking fly? I'm going to actually say it doesn't fly, because based on what you just said, our current world would be impossible.
That's exactly where I ended up within the last 10 seconds as well. Before that, I was all for it flying. And then as we thought about it, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying it doesn't fly because it just wouldn't, like the life we now know, the existence we now know, just literally wouldn't be possible. We'd be living in a different reality, and that might be good. It might be not good. It depends on your point of view. But it doesn't, animals talking for this current reality does not work. You have made me think about so many things today.
Ditto. I'm so sad now.
Oh no!
I'm like, I always talk about my crops I got in my backyard. Now I'm going to look at them like, but there's these stories that we have. I don't know if they're true. How some hunter-gatherer cultures would say a prayer and thank whatever they're eating for giving it their life so that they could have life. So maybe there have been human societies that were more in tune to the reality that we're all animals, and the sacrifice that you make today allows the next animal to live. This got deeper than I anticipated. We were talking about a green witch and a talking goat.
Hey, do not underestimate a green witch ever.
Are we a sci-fi podcast or a philosophy podcast? That's the
yes and depending on the episode. The good thing is I think we found a couple of books to add to our reading list. So our producers will put those in the notes. I got to give a shout out to our producers who on our website, which is doesitflypod.com, will have notes for this episode. They'll have some links for the things that Hakeem and I talked about if you want to take a deeper dive, some of the books that we've mentioned, and possibly some behind the scenes stuff to watch for Wicked. We have a new episode that drops every week. So Hakeem, where else can they find us besides our website?
They can find us where they consume their podcasts. Does It Fly Pod. is on your social medias. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on TikTok. You mentioned the website. If you listen to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, you can find us there as well. And I don't know if you heard, but tell everybody that this is the best podcast ever conceived by humans or any other animal. If you're a nerd, if you're a geek, if you love science, if you love sci-fi, which we both do, then this is the conversation you want to hear.
Absolutely. And we want to hear from you. So if you have thoughts on animals talking, any of the stuff that we've talked about in this episode, please leave them in the comments. If there is a gadget or gizmo you would like to see us talk about on Does It Fly, leave us a suggestion as well. And we will see you next time. Thanks for joining us.